Why is it a
Yeah.
unicorn?
So when I was working at American Security Project and had the opportunity to work for all of these retired senior military leaders, one of them called me Unicorn Maggie, and it just stuck. And so here we are. Turns out also, I am not a colonel in the Marine Corps, but women who are colonels in the Marine Corps are also called unicorns. So I think it's a happy accident.
It's really leaning into it, like you said earlier.
Yeah, you just got to lean into it. Like, so
Yeah.
this is my thing, right? I think you can have purple hair, you can have the nails, can be who you are, but you have to unequivocally be that, right? You can't do it halfway.
You have to
You
embrace
know?
it.
Yeah. You got to you got to really commit, man.
So, Maggie, you've also been involved in the rollout of this very new organization, the Leadership Council of Women in National Security. We were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that project and how you came to be involved.
Okay, I'm going to start with the second part first.
Okay.
Because I want to make clear, like, I am involved and I am fangirling so hard. They asked me to be a part of it. And so I just need everyone to understand that, like, I was asked to be involved and it was probably the greatest thing that has ever happened to me. But I bear very little / no responsibility or credit for its actual creation. So I will talk to you about LC Wins from my perspective. How's that?
Yeah.
Sure.
So LC Wins is, if you said to me, like, hey, can you make a list of like most of the coolest women in national security, defense, and foreign policy, and then like put their faces on a website, this would be that group of women to
Like
me, right?
who-
Like these are the
who are
people.
those?
Sorry?
Who are those, just for our listeners?
So, oh man. Okay, there's so many. Tammy Wittes, so Dr. Tamara Wittes, Corey Shockey, Arian Simpson, Lauren Schulman, Caroline Tess, like pretty much if there was a Hall of Fame, this would be it. And so they very kindly reached out to me and they were like, hey, would you like to be a part of the steering committee? And I was like, yes, I would. Thank you. In between them asking and me responding, there was like a very high pitched scream that happened on my end. And it was probably better that it happened over email and no one had to hear it. But LC Wins really looks at an area that's different from NatSec Girl Squad, but very much connected. So I mentioned to you guys before we started recording, NatSec Girl Squad is nonpartisan and apolitical. And those are really strict rules because, again, like most of our community they're Hatch Act restricted, right? We can't serve the people that we intend to serve if we are not those things. So we don't have a place, nor is it appropriate for us to be involved in anything political or partisan. And that doesn't just mean, personal opinions. That means like elections, campaigns, things like that. So LC Wins, their first kind of order of business was reaching out to, I guess now we have 15 of the current, I think it's 15 of the current candidates for president who have committed that at least 50% of their senior national security and defense political appointments will be held by women. So that's a really big deal. LC Wins also works with what is an incredible group of first-time members of Congress that are women that are serving right now who have like fabulous national security backgrounds and helping them kind of be the best they can be, right? So providing them with on-demand briefings, support, information, things like that, and helping them really be a part of the policy-making process in a way that they weren't before. So LC Wins, I think, is looking both at the long term, but also kind of in the short. You can't see me because I'm air quoting. There's no video here. So like the medium term and short term as well is like, these are some benchmarks we need to hit and how can we roll up our sleeves and do so. And I think the women who started this organization recognize, I'll call it star power, right? Like they really know their stuff. They have incredible careers and they have proven themselves, frankly, like on the world stage. Like people know who these women are and they mean business. And they have decided to use that energy and influence to say, hey, you need to do this, right? You need to commit to gender parity, whatever it is. And I think that's really powerful. So I am so excited and still very much fangirling to get to be a part of it. And we have lots of exciting programs. I mean, it's exciting to me because I'm a huge nerd, right? Like there are a few things on this planet I care more about than the interagency process. So the idea of like engaging with members of Congress and helping them be good at their jobs is the greatest thing I've ever heard. So I don't know if like other people will care about that as much as I do, but there's a lot of really cool things happening with LC Wins.
Is there a particular like gap or area in national security that you think women's voices are particularly needed?
All of it.
And that's why the gender parity pledge is so important.
I mean, I think the gender parity pledge is so important because we live in a world where people can't wrap their minds around progress without them having like a quota attached to it. And that's personally frustrating to me. And I need people to recognize that parity is a minimum, right? I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday. We had seen a movie, and in all of the previews, so the movie we were going to see was pretty much all men, right? But all of the previews, the cast were all women. We were having this conversation as like, are these women empowerment, girl power movies we're seeing in the previews? And I was like, that's a stupid question, because just because you see all women in the cast does not inherently make it like a girl power movie. Because every time I see all men in the cast or majority men in the cast, I'm not like, this is a boy power movie, right? Like, that doesn't happen. So I think we live in a world where we need a really clear target. And for some reason, we've decided that parity is what we're aiming for when it's really a minimum. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It's something that needs to be built upon.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we get a gold star for like including 50% of the population in 50% of positions. I think that's called like, you know, slightly doing sort of the right thing. And we have to realize that for hundreds, thousands of years, like we've decided that men get to do all the things and not women. And like, that's not good for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be back after this short break.
As China's role grows greater on the global stage, you want to stay up to date on the issues most pressing to China both domestically and internationally. Check out the Just China podcast for in-depth analysis on recent headlines and investigative reports on Chinese matters that affect our globalized world. We are Just China. Find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening.
So we've discussed at length about the national security field in general. I want to turn our focus right now to the U.S. military specifically. What do you think the American military could do to better build diversity, to elevate women's experiences and perspectives? What are some important topics that military leaders need to be thinking about?
So these are three totally separate questions, but I understand why you've asked them in succession. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you some questions so that I can better answer these, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I think this is really tricky, right? Like, what can we do to increase what I'm going to call competent diversity in the U.S. Armed Forces is different than amplifying women's voices. Can we agree there?
Yes.
It's not the same, right? Okay, so and that sort of is like your first and second question, right? I want to make sure I'm understanding properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I think diversity is much bigger than gender. Obviously, gender plays a role. There's this really cool place called the Krulak Center at Marine Corps University in Quantico. And I think their full name is like the Brute Krulak Center for Creative Thinking and Innovation or something. I don't totally understand what they do, but they're great. They're run by a wonderful woman, a colonel in the Marine Corps, so a unicorn named Valerie Jackson. And they're sort of just looking at like, how do we try things out, right? How do we do things differently? Sometimes just for the sake of doing them differently, just to see, do we get a different outcome? I think that kind of conversation, that kind of thought is really healthy. My academic background and kind of how I've made my way in national security is really from like a civ mil perspective. I'm really interested particularly in how the origin stories of the different services impact how they move through the world. So how they kind of run their policymaking processes, how they engage with one another, and how it supports or maybe hinders their mission. So you guys are both Navy guys, and we know the Navy really loves tradition, and there's like pretty much no way to better make that clear than like having the academy. Like the academy is built around the crypt of John Paul Jones, right? Like unclear if it's actually John Paul Jones in there, but we're gonna say it is, right? I mean, are you You agree with me? Like, you see kind of where I'm going? Like,
Yeah.
there's an obsession with how we've done things, and like, just because it's how we've done things, that's the answer to how we're going to do them. That is a really unhealthy way of approaching the world. And I'm not saying that we get away from tradition completely, because that's silly. But I think the first step to competent diversity, to amplifying and including women's voices, is to stop thinking about them as different, right?
Mm-hmm.
A woman is not a woman in the military. She's just in the military, right? You don't have a female Marine. Don't even get me started on the use of the word female instead of women or girl, like whatever.
Right. They're just Marines.
Just a Marine. Right, exactly. And I promise you that women who enlist in the Marines or become officers in the Marines, they certainly didn't do it to be singled out and be called like a woman Marine. Just a Marine, right? Recognizing that their experience is different, but still just a Marine. So I think it's really important that we start from the very basic level of like, why do we do the things we do, even if we think we know the answer? Does that make sense and sort of answer your first and second questions?
Yes.
Okay. Can you remind me what your third and fourth questions were? Because I totally got distracted.
It was just what important topics military leaders need to be thinking about. But
All of them.
Right.
Every single topic. There is not like all of them.
Yeah. I guess the question is more like, what do you see any, like, in your interactions with military people specifically, have you noticed any like blind spots or just areas where maybe they're especially deficient in their abilities to think about a certain,
deficient. So are you asking me, like, are there things the military is bad at because it's the military?
Yeah.
I think that's a hard question to answer. I think that there's a popular answer to that question. I think it would be easy for me to be like, yes, and list out a bunch of ideas. But as someone who does this day in and day out and spends a lot of time with like federal law enforcement and other federal agencies, like, the culture within the military and the different services is unique, but so is the culture at Secret Service. So is the culture at FBI. So, at DIA, at CIA, at NSA. Everybody has their own culture. Everybody has their own take on the mission. And so everybody has their own struggles or their own flavor of struggles, but it's still generally the same thing. There is nothing particularly deficient about the military as compared to other parts of our national security and defense apparatus. I think there are things that the struggle is different in each place. And I think we will be in a better place to have these conversations and, more importantly, do something about it when we stop kind of assuming that the military is in a very different place than anywhere else in this apparatus. Does that make sense? And this is not me saying the military gets off the hook easy. It's sort of the opposite of that. Nobody gets to be special. We are all in this together.
Right. So you mentioned that a lot of the way you approach these topics is through a civil lens. We were wondering what you think of the current state of civil-military relations in America.
Oh, God. Okay. I stress out about it so much, you guys. I spend so much time thinking about it. It's probably really irritating to the people who spend time with me in the flesh, because they're like, listen, you can only read Masks of War so many times. Like, then you've got to put it down and just take a deep breath. I think, like, at the macro level, at the micro level, like, what social media has done for parts of Civ Mil is super interesting, right? Connecting some military thinkers to some foreign policy thinkers. And I just like watch on the internet. Really interesting. What do I think about the lack of briefings from the Pentagon press room? Not good. Do I hope that changes? Yes. Do I think having more briefings fixes the problem? No. I think we've done some weird things to our military and around our military. Some of that is like on a policy level. For instance, we've decided that, the Army should be in state building, which just like, that's a whole other podcast. That's not good from my perspective. I also think the things we do around like the military and the NFL is super weird.
Right.
Like this is an area I could go on forever. I think it's a mixed bag, right? Everything is a mixed bag. Nothing is ever all good or all bad. I think there's lots of room for improvement in scholarship. How's that?
Scholarship in what areas specifically would you say?
So I think you can kind of divide it into three areas. One is how the general US population relates to members of the military, whether they're enlisted or officers. I think how the national security apparatus interacts with one another, particularly civilians